Last week I spoke about free will. Remember, I spoke about free will, what it is, what are the conditions of it. But the question we have to ask really is, we don't understand something. This whole situation doesn't make sense. Why does God have to create a situation, right? And then make a task that the Jews have to do, which is a situation they find themselves. And then he's got to be thrust between righteousness or sinfulness, right? And therefore he needs free will to decide which way to go. And then God supervises what was his decision. And either he rewards him by giving him greater opportunities, or he punishes him, right? Whether he go to Olam Haba, future world, or he doesn't go, or he has to be punished, or maybe he doesn't even go to Olam Haba. Why do we have this scenario? Why doesn't God just create Olam Haba, right? Why doesn't he create utopia, right? Right away? That is the question. I'm sure everybody's thought about that. Because if you create a situation where you have to earn your Olam Haba, your future world, then there's always a risk that you may not earn it, or you may earn much less. So why do we have to go through this situation? That's a question which I'm sure has bothered many people over the years, and so on. So I'd like to address that. So that's a fundamental question. And the answer to that is really very, certain sense, is very comforting. If I asked you, imagine this scenario. You're sleeping, and all of a sudden, God appears to you in your dream. And it's prophetic, it's prophecy, because God doesn't appear in dreams. He does, however, appear to you in prophecy, which could be, prophecy is a dream state. And God says to you, I like what you're doing, therefore, I will grant you any wish that you want. What would you like? Any wish you would like, I will grant it to you. But God says to you, think carefully. It's a one-shot opportunity. What would people want? Remember, it's like he appeared to Shlomo Melech. Remember? Shlomo Melech, Solomon? He said either Chochmah or wealth. And Shlomo said Chochmah, and therefore he got everything, because that was very smart of him. Okay, if God appeared to you and said to you, what would you like? What would you answer? What would you say?
10 more wishes.
No, that's the only thing you can't wish. Yeah, I know, that's cute, we know that. Come on. What would you, no, you wouldn't know the answer, so you cannot say it, I'm sorry. You've been disqualified. Come on, what would you answer? Hey, come on, you guys, you got one wish. Look, don't confuse me, I'm not God. However, it is an interesting scenario to contemplate.
Straight to Olam Haba.
What?
I want to be in Olam Haba.
You want to be in Olam Haba. Okay, you want to be in the future world. Not a bad wish. Right? What would you answer? Anybody else? Come on, what an opportunity. You guys have nothing to wish for. Come on, $1 billion, marry off all your kids, live in Lakewood. Come on. What would be the wish? You know? A vacation in Switzerland, Hawaii, come on. There's so much a guy can wish for.
An apartment on the coastal.
Apartment right next to the coastal. Right? It's not happening, right? I see you guys are too stunned by this. I'll tell you what I would wish for. I want to be God. I want to be a God. Come on, it's incredible. What is God? God is he's independent of anything, right? He has no, in other words, he's limitless, right? He's independent of everything. He has no limits on what he can do, right? He has no dependencies, no limitations. You know, he's incredible. You know, he can do whatever he wants, right? Like it says in Hazinum, right? I kill, I give life, I cure. You know, I'm it. From my hand, there's no rescue, right? So I would say to God, I would love to be just like you, because then, right, I could do whatever I want, just like you said. Have more wishes. Anyway, that's what I would wish for. Now, would God do that? I mean, He said there's no limit to this. Would He actually enable me to be a God?
That's what Adam Harishon did, and we see how that turned
What
out.
did He do?
He wanted to be like God.
It turned out bad because God never said, I'll make you God. I'm saying He would actually say to me in a dream. It's two different situations where He would say, one wish and you got it, anything you want. I would say, fine, I want to be God. There's nothing wrong with that. If He's asking me, right? He can't compare it to Adam. Adam would never.
Snakes then, right?
Yeah, I mean, God never said, I'll make you God.
Trick. Snake.
Anyway, yeah, that was a. Of course, that was a.
No, but
that's
that's
what-
really what he wanted. That was his.
That's what he
Right.
wanted.
So, but I'm not. That's not the same. That is not the scenario I'm pointing out. That's what I would say. So what's God going to answer to that? You know what He answers? I'll do it. I'll make you a God. Why? Because you don't realize something. What the Rebbe Hashem wants to do to mankind is called Hatova Shlema. He wants to give the greatest good that He can give. And with God, that's infinite. But the question then is, what's the greatest good that God can give? And that is to replicate God. Isn't it? That's the greatest good. You saw, to make me like Him. No dependencies, no limitations, no deficiencies. Wow, what a being, right? And the Rebbe Hashem said, I will do it. I will do that. And that's what starts the whole problem. Because the Rebbe Hashem wants to give you Hatova Shlema, perfect good, make you God, this is what starts the whole problem. It's interesting. Why? What is the problem really? The problem is this. We are created entities, correct? We are not God. We are created in the image of God, right? Okay. So then, how could a created entity who always must receive something, existence, correct, from outside of him, how can I feel like I'm God? You can't. Your very being indicates to you that you're not a God, because you need to receive your existence from outside of you. We are completely dependent on God, and therefore we are limited because it depends how much the source will give us. You see, and we are certain defective. So then, how could He make us God? This is the question. What kind of a? Because you see, so therefore He creates what's called an individual, a neshama. But the problem, like I said, is that the neshama is both a nimtza, because it is created in the image of God. In fact, that's really what it is. Chazal tell us that the neshama is a cheluk l'kaymimal. It's part of God above. In other words, if you look at the Shekhinah is like a coin, heads and tails. On one side of the coin is the divine presence, the Shekhinah. On the other side is the neshama. Yes. Now, in other words, we are really a cheluk l'kaymimal. We are a part of the living God. We don't understand how that is, but in some sense, we are literally divine. You see. So that's one aspect of the neshama, of who you are. You don't realize it. You're all divine beings. You see? I mean, maybe some people do realize it, and that's where the megalomaniacs. You know what I'm saying? But really, we are divine beings. But our problem is that there's an aspect of us, it's not the nimtza, the existential being, that's a nivra. We are created entities, and as such, we are completely dependent on another source to exist. You see? A divine being, by definition, is what? Is independent, unlimited, and non-deficient. You see? That's what it means to be God. You see, I can do whatever I want. I don't need an outside source. The problem with the neshama is the aspect of the fact that it's a created being. It can't do that. You see? So therefore, what does the neshama feel? On one side, the neshama feels it is God, you see, and on the other side, it realizes its complete inadequacy. How do you resolve that? This in Chazal is called Nahama Sufo, the bread of shame. What is bread of shame? The bread of shame, let's assume it's an emotion. The bread of shame. What is shame? It's an interesting emotion. Very, very devastating emotion. What is shame? How do we understand shame? What shame is a feeling or an emotion that a person has when all of a sudden he comes to the realization that he's nobody or he's inferior. You're ashamed. There are many ways to create shame. You know, let's assume a guy's taking a shower, right? And all of a sudden he's going to the towel, right? And all of a sudden he passes a mirror. And he looks at himself in the mirror and says, I can't believe what I'm looking at, right? Which is probably what many people think when they look at themselves in the mirror, you know? Because, you know, you look at your body or whatever, this is me. I mean, you realize the inadequacy, you know, or the deficiency of the human body. So all of a sudden he has a sense of inadequacy, inferiority, and vulnerability. You know, his inferiority is exposed to him. That you feel shame. What, let's say, is the worst. Let's assume you have a child who's 5-year-old, right? And let's assume the father, right, is very brutal. So the kid does something wrong, and the father says to the kid, you idiot, you jerk. How do you go and do this? What do you think that kid's going to feel? Not only will, right, he will have a terrible case of inferiority, and therefore he will feel shame because he believes the father, you see. And as a result of that, he believes the father, so he believes that the father's right, that he is a nothing. He is an idiot. So he will feel terrible sense of shame because the father to this child has exposed the deficiency of the child, and the child believes it, and therefore the child feels the shame. You see, and if this happens on a constant basis, this child will feel incredible shame growing up. You see, in many ways, shame is one of the most devastating of all feelings. You know, it's worse than insecurity or inadequacy because it's a statement about your inferiority, your self-worth, or your self-esteem. We all have shame in different ways because of many different reasons. You see, if a guy's trying to make a living and he's not making it, he's ashamed. He's not ashamed to people, but he's ashamed to himself. Because what am I? If I can't even be successful in bringing home money, then I have to be ashamed of myself. You know, how many times does somebody do something wrong and another person says to him, you should be ashamed of yourself? What is he really saying, right? Hey, how do you do this kind of thing? Because you're a lowlife or you're inferior. That's what it means. You should be ashamed of yourself. You should experience what it means to be a nobody. Because that's what you just did, an act of nobodiness. If that's a word. You see, shame is a terrible emotion. And shame is at the root or at the foundation of mental health. Or I should say mental, emotional disorders. People who have emotional disorders are always trying to avoid inferiority and shame that comes from the inferiority. You see, that's what shame is, you know. Now, when the neshama now, let's go back to the spirituality, the ruchnius. Here you have a neshama that is divine. Why? Because it's a cheluk l'kay mimal. It's part of the living God. Without going into how is that possible if God is an enei mavadoi, without that going into that mystery. But clearly, the neshama is a divine being, you know. And that's what the Nachash said to the Adam, V'yisim kelokim, you'll be like God. Because part of him felt like God, except he wasn't God all the way, you see. Therefore, the neshama does what? It feels like it's divine. At the same time, it's acting not as a divine being, but as a weak individual, right? Because it needs to receive everything from God. It's a taker. God is a giver. That's the power of a God, to give always, whenever you want, right? Without conditions. But a taker is not a God. Because the very act of taking is an indication that he's inferior. He's certainly not divine. So look at the neshama. On one side of the neshama, right, he feels like he's a giver. On the other side, the reality is he's a taker. That's Nahama Sufa. It's not so much an emotion, it's a conceptual contradiction. How can I feel like God, the neshama, on one side, because I am a part of the living God, right, the Shekhinah. On the other side, I'm a taker, right, because I can't do anything myself. So therefore there's a tremendous sense of what? The realization of inferiority. But it's a contradiction, you see, because how can I feel one thing on one side, a giver, and on the other side, a taker? It's a contradiction inherently. It's called mutually exclusive concepts or feelings. You see? So by making a neshama part of God, what does that mean? Automatically, the neshama has that feeling. You see? But the reality is he's a taker. So how does God going to resolve that? Because the reason why he made him divine is to make him, in a certain sense, like God, which is the divine being. But inherently there's a contradiction. How's God going to solve the problem? Enter free will. So what God says, there's only one way to solve the problem. I need to give you the power to do something which only God can do, and that is be a true cause. So free will means, like I said last time, you are true cause of your acts. And only a divine being, in a certain sense, can be a true cause. So even though, so if you choose to be righteous as a true cause, and it is said, since you chose righteousness in the sense of what? Of being a true cause of your righteousness, you have replicated an act of God. And therefore, I don't have a contradiction, because I did something which is godlike and divine. Even though righteousness will now enable me to be in the future world, and in the future world I'm a complete taker. Because you don't exist independent of God, God still has to give you everything. So if the future world is nothing more than a taker situation. But I created the opportunity to take. I caused it. If I didn't cause it, which is a divine act, I wouldn't be taking either. So what God removes and He gives you is a feeling, in some sense, you are a giver, because you gave that to yourself by having free will, all right, which is a replication of God's act, and the free will means that you truly caused it. Correct? That is divine. So even though in Olam Haba, in the future world, I have to take, because I am not God in that sense, but you are God, because the only reason why you're here and receiving anything, or whatever you receive, is because you truly caused it, and that is a divine act. So what God does is remove the flaw of complete taking or reception by giving you a situation in which you can actually do something divine, because that's what free will is. You are a true cause, which only God can do. But in some way which is unknown, He has given that capacity to the neshama, or each individual, and therefore the neshama says to itself in Olam Haba, it is true that I'm a taker, because I can't create Olam Haba, but I'm the one responsible for being here in the first place, and that was divine. Therefore, as long as I did a divine act, that already is enough to mollify me, to be okay with that, you see? And therefore, bring it on for eternity, you see? Because the whole reason why I'm here, and the reason why I'm receiving what I'm receiving, you see, and in terms of what degree I'm receiving, that is my choice. I truly cause it, that's a divine act. Therefore, the contradiction is gone, you see? So the neshama receives, at the same time realizing that it is divine. That's the solution. So that's what Nahama Sufa is, you see. So the shame, remember, it's not so much that I feel shame, but it's a contradiction in existence, you see. And therefore that provides a solution. Therefore the only way to remove the concept of Nahama Sufa, of bread of shame, of the feeling of the contradiction, is you need to come to a world in which there's a task, have free will, have two situations, righteousness and sinfulness, and do the job. You see, that's why Olam Haba, which is this world, is critical in order to have that in Olam Haba. Because if you didn't have it, you would constantly be for eternity with this contradiction in the neshama. How could I be taking it in and feel like God? This is no good. So, in a certain sense, you'd be in spiritual agony for eternity. You see, it's a spiritual agony. In a certain sense, for you to feel one thing and its direct opposite at the same time. So God said, I'm going to solve the problem by making you act like God, which is you are the reason for your righteousness. You see. And therefore, in a certain sense, God removes the concept of Nahama Sufa, bread of shame. Because shame, remember, it's not so much that it's a feeling, which it is by us, but the neshama experiences as an existential contradiction. But to us, that would be shame. Therefore, it's called the bread of shame. Now, this is what we understand. Most people will never deal with this concept. You know, they'll read it, Nahama Sufa, briefly, but they will never really ask themselves, what in the world, you know, because what they ask the question. Well, why create shame in the first place? Because you made everything, so if you wouldn't have created the feeling of shame, right, then I wouldn't have had it. Just give me Olam Haba without the feeling of shame. You see, that's their question. But really the answer is, to the best of the way of explaining it, is that it's not a feeling that God created. Once you created the feeling, the concept of existence, and once you created the concept of divine existence, right, then you're stuck with contradiction, and you've created a concept of oppositions to that concept, then you're stuck. Because existing as a divine being, and existing as a, which is a giver, and existing as a taker, right, is automatically, it's contradictory. It's called mutually exclusive concepts, you see. So therefore, what God does in a certain sense is He has to remove that feeling, not feeling, but what's called an existential conflict or contradiction. And He does that by putting you in a situation where you have to choose to be righteous and so on. And then, even then, you can't, in other words, you can't get something for free. And this is the concept of didnt, or judgment. Why is there judgment? Why did God create the world through judgment or justice? Justice is, if you do A, you get B. You see, that's what justice really is. Actually, it's the third law of motion that Newton said. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That's really didnt, you see? And that's the concept of judgment and justice. You get exactly what you did. No more and no less. But God does help in the fact that He has many assistive systems to help you. But in the end, every person will get exactly what they did, and therefore, if they do that, there's no Nahama Sufa. You see? Why is it by a tzaddik it says that God is exacting with a tzaddik, k'chut hasaira, like a thread? Because a tzaddik doesn't want anything for free. Because if he gets anything for free, which he didn't cause, that's Nahama Sufa. That means he's getting something which he did not cause, right? And that's a gift. No good. Because the divine aspect of himself doesn't want gifts that he didn't earn. You see? That's why the Hashem knows tzaddikim, they don't want anything for nothing. So they don't even want God to assist them. Because in a certain sense, that is a gift for nothing in the terms of how He assists us. But we need that, or else we can't even get to the first base. If God didn't assist us, forget it. It's over with us. But a tzaddik who has control of his emotions and the mitzvahs and the averis and all that, he doesn't want anything for free. Everything I have, I want to work for. Don't give me a shred for anything. Don't do me any favors. I want to earn everything that I get in Olam Haba. Do not assist me. That's what it means, that God is exacting with a tzaddik, k'chut hasaira, to a thread. You see. But we, of course, we are not at that level, you know. So God therefore had to mix in compassion or mercy with justice. Because compassion or mercy is nothing more than the suspension of judgment or justice. You see. But we need that. You see, or else we will never survive. That's what it means that God created the world through didnt, justice. Means you do A, you get B. You don't do A, you don't get B. Exactly. You see why? Because you cannot receive anything that you didn't do. Because if you do receive it, you're going to have shame on a spiritual level, the existential problem and conflict. You see? Now, this is just an explanation that I tried to provide, The real answer is infinite. We don't really know. You see? But in the end, at least it's some type of answer, response, a solution to a problem that really nobody mentions. It's almost like everybody's avoiding the problem. Yet, think about it. This whole world is only predicated on one concept, Nam Diksufa. If there was no such thing as this existential conflict, we wouldn't have Olam Haba. You realize that? In other words, if we could tolerate receiving, taking, what are we doing here? I'm okay. I'll be in Olam Haba, taking, I don't care. But since God wanted to make us divine, you can't do it. Interesting. That the very concept that He wanted to provide us the best necessitates this world, which is risky. Because if you don't do it, you don't get it. Or whatever, and so on, So ultimately, that's really an answer that I'm trying to provide. In terms of why Olam Haba, this world exists, which is fraught with so many dangers in terms of not being righteous but being sinful. But like I say, we have assisting devices where God instituted suffering to clean you up. You see? So if you clean up, then you deserve what you get because you were cleaned up and you suffered. You see, all of it, mitzvahs, tshuva, and suffering, all of it satisfy judgment. You see? So therefore there's no namak sufa. There's no existential crisis. You see? And there's no shame. You see? That's why everything that God, in the end, we have to deserve every iota we get in Olam Haba. But there are just different ways that God can provide, wherewithals to enable us to survive. And that's why we need Olam Haba. That's why we have to work. We have free will, like I mentioned, That's why we have to struggle, all the ideas. That's why there's suffering, to make sure that when we are in Olam Haba, we feel we deserve it because we suffered, and therefore we will not have what's called an existential crisis of being a giver and a taker at the same time. And that's it. That's what the Hashem did, and so on. Any case, that's a solution. Like I said, ultimately, the real concept, of course, is infinite. We don't really know. But obviously, it has to be for some reason, or else what in the world are we doing here? The interesting thing, the conjecture, is what happens if a person doesn't merit the future world because he's done so much evil. So the question is, which I will actually talk about next time, which is, after Sukkot, the concept of, are people really destroyed, annihilated, and they don't exist anymore? Why can't God clean them up? Clean them up by giving them terrible amounts of suffering, and so on, and therefore they'll also feel like in the future world, and so on. Not only that, what happens if an neshama walks over to God and says, listen, I'm okay, I don't mind being embarrassed or ashamed, I just want the Olam Haba. Just give me the goodies, I can live with the shame, don't worry about it, that's my problem. So the question is, what's God going to say? Because the guy's saying, hey, I don't mind being on welfare for my entire life. That's really what it is, welfare, right? You get a check in the mail. I wouldn't say it's Social Security. Actually, there's no money in Social Security anymore. They robbed the whole bank. But anyway, the government. But it's welfare. So a guy says, hey, I don't mind being on welfare. Hey, just check out, certain neighborhoods. Everybody's on welfare. They don't seem to be disturbed at all. You see? So a guy theoretically could say that to Hashem, I'm okay with this. Olam Haba, who cares? Who cares if I earned it or not? Obviously that's not going to work. Or maybe it does work. Maybe there are people who really can't be in Olam Haba at all because the amount of sinfulness is enormously extensive, whatever. And maybe God says, okay, you can do it. You'll be in Olam Haba, you'll just have Namak Sufa, that's all. And if it's okay with you, it's okay with me. By the way, just to end the shir, there are beings, by the way, that exist eternally, and they have Nam Sufa. You know who they are? The angels. Yes. Because the angels are doing what? They're also incredible beings, right? But at the same time, they have Nam Sufa. Ramchal says that in Adam Amorim. You know, they have shame because they're taken all the time, yet they will exist eternally. You see, so it's interesting. There are beings, but God decided to create a species called the souls that does not want them to have that. You know, so it's interesting that there are angels that, you know, and they exist eternally. There's no death by an angel and so on. That does have Nam Sufa, you see, in a certain sense. Probably the amount of divinity that they feel is severely lacking. So maybe their Nam Sufa is really a drop because they don't have the divine sense of self, you see. Probably. But anyway, that is an interesting concept. Anyway, that's, I feel, is a solution, and I think it answers the question and so on. Any questions? Now, don't be ashamed. Yeah?
First of all, is the neshama divine or is it spiritual?
It's divine. Well, let's put it this way. It's not God, but it's the greatest form of spirituality.
So it is spiritual?
It is spiritual, yeah. Nothing could be God, really. But the Shekhinah, whatever that is divine. So the Shama is at the level of the Shekhinah in its divinity, whatever that means.
So are you saying there's a viable solution that a person theoretically at the end of time could say the petition that, you know,
I'm bringing it up as an interesting scenario.
But is it brought down that such an
I've never seen such a scenario. Yeah, I mean, I can say any, but what does it say in Pirkei Avos? Let's say, what does it say? Al kocha noilad, against your will, you were born, you live, and you die. So what does that say? You know, you don't call the rules. I do. That's what it does. You know, and maybe what does it mean? Against your rules, you were born. Why would anybody protest? And the answer is because Rabbi Nahama said, "Hey, what do I need this for? You know, just give me Olam Haba without having to work for it." So God said, "I'm sorry. These are the conditions, and therefore, against your will, you are born." That against your will, you were born was probably to answer the neshama that says, "Please, give me Olam Haba now. I don't want Olam Hazeh." If you think about it, because why are you born against your will? Why? Anybody would choose to have this incredible amount of reward and delight in God. But the answer is because the neshama is saying, "Hey, I don't want to go down there. Come on, just give me Olam Haba." And God said, "I'm sorry. The contract, the rules are, you got to come down, be righteous on your own merit, and then you will have caused, that is a divine act, and therefore you'll be fine in Olam Haba." That's my interpretation of Nam Sufa is probably what that means by the neshama, but the fact that you have to come down and be born against your will.
You said once that a person can petition HaKadosh Baruch Hu in terms of the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is beyond all laws.
Yes.
So isn't that contradicting?
Oh, no. If he wanted to do it, he could have done it. But he doesn't want to do it.
So then why should a person even be petitioned for that?
Listen, it's not a matter. That's when he finds out that God doesn't want to do it.
That's not chaim though.
No.
It's something else.
Yeah, that's when he finds out. No. These are the rules that I created, God says, in terms of the existence of this creation. You need to come down and remove Nam Sufa. As a malach, no, but as an neshama. But I want to tell you something. Clearly, experiencing the future world without any kind of feeling of inferiority, right, must be awesome. I mean, if God had to do it, it must have been a terrible obstruction of feeling the reward. God said, it's not worth it. I'd rather send you down to this world, which is risky because you may never do righteousness, all risky, and so, you know. Better that and get Olam Haba on those terms than get Olam Haba on the terms where you do not have to work for it. That's his decision. We don't know because we've never experienced Olam Haba either with Nam Sufa, bread of shame, or without bread of shame. But I'm sure if God said, okay, I'm going to show you the difference. Okay? I'm sure we would have said, forget it. I'm coming down. I'm sure God is smarter than all of us.
In terms of regret,
Regret? What's regret?
the person is not in the same madriga that he could have been.
That's the rule. You can only get what you
Obviously, it has
cause.
to be cleared up too.
What?
Will there be a regret in the Olam Haba, or even that has to be cleared up?
No, everything is cleared up. There cannot be regret because that itself.
Meaning, I got everything I worked for, but I know.
And it's mine.
And it's.
I own it.
But I could have been.
No, there won't be a feeling because that feeling would have killed you. That means you would have eternal grief.
Right.
So what kind of Olam Haba is that? Eternal grief.
Do you have any
Is that
idea?
Olam Haba? What?
Do you have?
I want to tell you
ideas
something.
on-
In Olam Haba, there won't be any jealousy because that'll kill you for eternity. That's the greatest agony of all, is to be jealous of the next guy for eternity.
Yeah, but don't you
Think about that, right? So there's no jealousy, right? And there's no regret. Those things are removed.
How would those? So we have not for shame. Then what do we have for regret and jealousy?
We don't. You don't have that in Olam Haba.
How are those cleared up?
I don't know. You have to ask God for that.
don't
But
you
I'm
have,
sure he's capable of doing that. What?
Do you have a Mesilas Yesharim that says you'll be burned by your neighbor's canopy?
That's only initially, probably.
Uh-huh.
But that's not for eternity.
Uh-huh.
You think about that. Imagine feeling that way for eternity. I mean, this is called Olam Haba. It's called Olam Gehenim. This is hell. It's not an Olam Haba. If that's what you feel for eternity, it's the worst Gehenim of all. Right? Why would God do that to a guy? Because nobody's equal in Olam Haba. Because, everybody arrives at Olam Haba in the future world with a different level of what is accomplishments and achievements. Nobody's equal, we know that. There's so many variables here, So why would God do that to a guy? I mean, you're not doing me a favors by it. I mean, none of people would say, then Hashem would say, excuse me, annihilate me. I can't have Olam Haba this way. It's obvious, Can't be.
How does the suffering help to get rid of the bread of shame?
Say it again?
How does the suffering help you to get rid of bread of shame? Or like
Because suffering is a compensation for a sin. It compensates. It's an undoing of the sin. When you sin, you enjoyed. Now you have to suffer. So it's like, it's the absence. In other words, your suffering compensates for the pleasure. So it removes the fact that you had pleasure from sinning. Because I suffered. In other words, you need to erase all sins and you need to cause all righteousness. And suffering is kapori torment, and it removes the sin. That's what suffering does. Okay, great. So let's look forward to an Olam Haba that we will own, like they say, you own it, right? That's exactly what happens in Olam Haba in the future world, and that we cause. And that reward is infinite, eternal. It's eternal, and we cannot imagine the reward of that. But the critical thing is to remove the fact that, well, it shows I'm deficient. The fact that you caused it shows that you are not deficient, and therefore you can enjoy taking. That's really what it's all about. And not be distracted or suffer from the fact that, well, I'm taking, I never gave. You see? And that's the best explanation, What really goes on, we don't know, because we don't know all these places, what Olam Haba is, and so on. We don't really know what goes on there, and so on.